Throughout the history of war, there are weapons created in laboratories, honed by engineers, and perfected through years of testing. And then there are weapons born in haste, fear, and desperation when there's no time left to perfect. The STEN Mk II falls precisely into the latter category. It's not a parade weapon or a symbol of technological superiority. It's a weapon of survival, a weapon that had to work here and now, even if it looked crude, fired inconsistently, and broke down more often than desired. When Britain faced invasion in 1940, the country was experiencing one of the darkest periods in its history. France had fallen. The expeditionary force had been evacuated from Dunkirk, abandoning a huge amount of equipment and small arms on the continent. Britain was left virtually without modern automatic weapons. The army suffered a severe shortage of submachine guns, a weapon vital for defense, sabotage, street fighting, and special forces operations. At that moment it became clear. Britain had no time for complex and expensive solutions. Developing a perfect weapon was out of the question. A weapon was needed that could be produced quickly, cheaply, and in large quantities, using minimal resources and unskilled labor. Thus was born the idea for the STEN submachine gun, which would later go down in history as one of the simplest and most controversial weapons of World War II. The name STEN sounds almost mechanical, and that's no accident. It's made up of the first letters of the designer's last names, Shepard and Turpin, and EN, for Enfield, the arms factory where the development took place. The name itself is devoid of pathos. No legends, just utility, just function. The STEN Mk II didn't try to be pretty. It didn't strive to be convenient. It was meant to be manufactured. Its design was so simple that in the early years of the war, STENs were assembled not only in factories, but also in semi-artisanal settings. Tube, bolt, spring, barrel, magazine, a minimum of parts, a minimum of machining. Almost everything that could be stamped and welded was stamped and welded. But it was precisely this simplicity that made the STEN one of the most important weapons of World War II. It could be dropped from airplanes to partisans. It could be passed on to the underground in occupied Europe. It could be disassembled and hidden. It could be reassembled without special tools. The STEN became a weapon of resistance, sabotage, and underground warfare. However, this simplicity had a downside. The STEN jammed. It was unsafe. It could fire if dropped. Its magazine was finicky, and its ergonomics were far from ideal. Soldiers often hated it, but they continued to use it because there was no alternative. In situations where the choice was between a poor weapon and no weapon at all, the STEN became the only chance. Compared to the sleek MP40 or the massive Thompson, the STEN almost seemed like a mockery of the concept of weapons design. Yet it proved to be the very tool that enabled Britain and the resistance movements to fight deep behind enemy lines. It was wielded by SOE soldiers, French Maquis, Norwegian and Polish underground fighters, and saboteurs who faced a well-armed enemy with minimal resources. The STEN Mk II is a story not of perfection, but of necessity. It's a story of how war forces us to abandon ideals and embrace a working, albeit imperfect, solution. This weapon doesn't inspire admiration. It commands respect, for having been created at a time when the question was not in years and months, but in weeks and days. Following the Dunkirk evacuation in 1940, Britain found itself in a critical situation. Thousands of small arms, machine guns, and assault rifles were abandoned on the continent. The army suffered a severe shortage of modern submachine guns. The Thompson M1928 submachine guns it had were purchased from the United States, but they were expensive, heavy, and required complex manufacturing. For a country under constant bombing, this was an unaffordable luxury. The solution was radical: create an extremely simple submachine gun that could be produced in the thousands in the shortest possible time. Thus, the STEN became not a project for weapons perfection, but a project for the survival of the state. The STEN Mk II was built on the straight pull-bolt action principle, the simplest and most reliable design for automatic weapons. Its design consisted of just a few key elements: steel receiver tube, massive cylindrical breech, return spring, detachable barrel, side store, primitive folding stock. In total, there were about 50 parts, most of which could be manufactured using stamping and welding. By comparison, The MP40 had more complex mechanics and required much more precise machining. Main characteristics of STEN Mk II: caliber 9x19mm parabellum, rate of fire 500-550 rounds per minute, weight 3.2 kilograms, length 760 millimeters, magazine 32 rounds. Fire automatic only. The STEN had no safety in the traditional sense. Instead, it used a slot in the frame where the bolt handle could be locked. This design proved dangerous. If the weapon was dropped, the bolt could be released, causing an accidental discharge. Like the MP40, the STEN magazine was a double-stack design with a single-stack release. This made it susceptible to contamination and deformation. In mud, sand, and dust, the magazine often caused magazine jams. British soldiers quickly learned the rule: never hold a STEN gun by the magazine, otherwise the risk of misfiring the rounds increased exponentially. This required discipline and constant cleaning, a rare luxury in wartime. One of the STEN's main advantages was its production flexibility. The weapons were assembled at arms factories, at mechanical engineering enterprises, in semi-artisan workshops, in underground conditions. The STEN could be manufactured without complex machine tools. In some cases, components were produced in different locations, and assembly was carried out at the final assembly point. This made the STEN an ideal weapon for mass supply to the military and the underground. By 1943, more than 4 million STENs of various modifications had been produced, of which the Mk II became the most numerous. The STEN gained its true fame not in parades or regular battles, but in the hands of underground fighters. The British SOE actively dropped STEN from aircraft. French resistance, Polish Home Army, Norwegian and Dutch underground fighters, Yugoslav partisans. The reasons were obvious. STEN was compact, easy to understand, used the German 9x19 cartridge, did not require complex maintenance. Partisans could obtain ammunition from the enemy and use it without any problems. Under occupation, this was critical. Soldiers' opinions on STEN were mixed. His, hated for the wedges, were afraid because of spontaneous shots, criticized for being inconvenient, but they were constantly in use. In close combat, the STEN was deadly. At ranges of up to 50 meters, it allowed for dense automatic fire, especially in buildings, trenches, and narrow passages. STEN was often used: paratroopers, armored vehicle crews, scouts, saboteurs. Where the rifle was too long, the STEN became indispensable. Interestingly, the STEN and MP40 used the same cartridge, but represented different philosophies. MP40 is better balanced, ergonomic, and comfortable. STEN, simpler, cheaper, rougher. In the hands of a trained soldier, the MP40 was more comfortable, but in the hands of a partisan, the STEN was more practical, because it could be repaired literally on the fly. STEN Mk II had a number of serious problems: lack of a proper fuse, unstable supply of cartridges, poor ergonomics, low production culture. However, all these shortcomings were a deliberate choice. A STEN was not created as an ideal, but as a compromise between speed, cost, and efficiency. The STEN experience influenced post-war weapons: simplification of designs, modularity, orientation towards mass production. Many countries after the war used his principles to create their own cheap submachine guns. The story of the STEN Mk II is the story of war without illusions. This weapon wasn't designed to impress. It wasn't meant to be convenient, beautiful, or perfect. Its sole purpose was to fire quickly, en masse, and where no other weapon existed. In this sense, the STEN became more than just a submachine gun, but a reflection of the very essence of total war, where decisions are made not by best, but by possible. The STEN Mk II symbolized a moment when industry, engineering, and tactics were subordinated to a single goal: survival. Britain could not afford the luxury of complex and expensive designs. Every day of delay meant the risk of invasion, sabotage, and defeat. Under these circumstances, the STEN proved the perfect solution, not the perfect weapon, but the perfect response to the crisis. Paradoxically, its very weaknesses made it strong. The simplicity of its design allowed the STEN to be produced in the millions. Its minimal number of parts meant it could be assembled anywhere in factories, workshops, or underground. It was far from peacetime weapon standards, but it perfectly suited the realities of war, where aesthetics had no place. Mk II occupied a special place in the history of the resistance movement. For partisans and underground fighters, it became more than just a weapon, but an opportunity. It could be disassembled, hidden, transported, and reassembled. The use of the 19mm cartridge allowed ammunition to be replenished from captured items. In the hands of resistance fighters, the STEN became a tool for sabotage, diversion, and precision strikes against occupying forces. Where a rifle was too cumbersome and a pistol too weak, the STEN became the solution. However, the STEN was never a soldier's weapon of choice. It was feared for its accidental discharges. It was cursed for its jams and finicky magazine. It was unforgiven for its mistakes. Yet despite all this, it was used again and again, because in close combat, it was deadly, because there was often simply no alternative, because sometimes even a bad weapon is better than no weapon at all. The STEN didn't disappear after the war. It continued to be used in colonial conflicts, third world countries, guerrilla movements, and police forces. Its design influenced an entire generation of post-war submachine guns, proving that mass production and simplicity can be just as important as technological sophistication. But the main legacy of the STEN Mk II isn't in the metal or the blueprints. It's in its symbolism. The STEN became the weapon of those who fought in the shadows. Not regular armies with parades and banners, but underground fighters, saboteurs, and resistance fighters. It's not associated with triumph. It's associated with struggle. Today, the STEN Mk II is studied by historians, collectors, and reenactors. It is criticized, analyzed, and compared. But despite all this, it cannot be erased from history, because it has become an example of how war changes the very concept of weapons, how ideals give way to necessity, and how a simple steel tube with a bolt can become a symbol of resistance for an entire continent. The STEN Mk II isn't a legend of perfection. It's a legend of survival, and that's why it will forever remain a part of World War II history.